Okay, good morning and thank you very much for joining us. I am Yori Fulani. Okay, over the weekend, a lot happened politically, especially if you concentrate on Osun State. All 30, local government council seats have been won by, the PDP in Osun State. PDP is the ruling party in Osun State. But then there was the news item that the National Publicity Secretary of APC, Mr. Felix Mwaka, has advised the federal government not to release the allocation to Osun because Osun just, it wasn't legal according to, the APC National Publicity Secretary. So we'll look into that today. First of all, the call that federal government don't release the allocations to Osun government. What do we make of that? And of course, as far as they are concerned in Osun, all 30 council seats has been won by the PDP. Okay, our guests, we have a couple of guests. Dr. Misbah Alamu Latif, Senior Lecturer, Law School, University of Hull in the UK, is one of our guests. Good morning to you, Dr. Latif.
Good morning, and thank you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Well, first of all, what do you make of the, because it depends on whose side you're looking at it from. The governor has inaugurated, I believe, the winning team, but as they are saying that is, the law has not been taken into consideration, and it is APC's contention through its National Publicity Secretary that the governor didn't have any business conducting that election. In fact, if you had followed the news, he had said that it was a wanton waste of public funds. But what would be your view on this situation, Dr. Latif?
Well, the situation in Osun State, quite unfortunately, I think it's something I've described elsewhere as a contrived legal controversies or conundrum, and unfortunately, mischievously pursued by our politicians. So we don't really need the controversies at all if all the parties, have simply complied with the requirements of law. And what is that requirement? I understand that an election held in Osun State over the weekend, or what was called an election, and which, with all sense of responsibility, I've also taken my time to assess, and I've classified it as a sham. But whatever it is a contention of the government of Osun State that they had an election, and then it is a contention on the other side of the APC and others that election ought not to have held. And I think this is the right position according to law. Because prior to that election, we had, several court judgments, and the most significant one being the one delivered on the 10th of February, 2025, and which was the judgment of the Court of Appeal, which clearly affirmed that there were no vacancies at the local government council in Osun State. The court came to that conclusion, one, by affirming the appeal of the APC and other parties arising from a federal high court judgment delivered in November 2022. And in doing so, the court actually literally struck out the federal high court judgment that had purportedly dismissed or sacked the APC elected chairman, and also purportedly invalidated the election that produced them. So when the Court of Appeal did that on the 10th of February, what they did implicitly was to restore those chairmen back to their seats. So if the seats were not vacant in the first place, then what was the need or rush, or desperation, if you like, by the Osun State government and the electoral body in Osun State, OSEC, to conduct a fresh election? And for me, I think, as I said earlier, all of these are contrary because parties, on different sides, have simply refused to comply with due process of law. So I think it is in that context that those who have advocated or who has urged the federal government to withhold the allocations, have made those call, because I think if the resources of the public were to properly apply, then they should be channeled to the appropriate, I would say, sources or hand, so that so the government has a duty to do that. So the point I'm trying to make in essence is basically that all of these so-called controversies are clearly avoidable. And I think politicians simply need to toe the path of honor, due process, and legality.
When the Court of Appeal overruled, I believe it was the State High Court, and as you said, everything has then gone back to the status quo of where it was. Now, at the Court of Appeal, I believe, they overturned that federal High Court decision.
Exactly.
What was the reason for that?
Okay, the reason basically was that the Court of Appeal on the 10th of February decided that the Federal High Court in Osogbo that purportedly invalidated the local government election in Osun State that was held, I think, on the 5th of October 2022, and that also purportedly sacked the elected chairman. So the Court of Appeal decided that the Federal High Court had no jurisdiction to take that suit in the first place. And the Court of Appeal went ahead to actually strike out the suit. What that technically means in law is that these local government chairmen were never sacked.
Yeah.
The election that produced them was never invalidated. And this is why I said earlier that if this were a true situation of things according to law, and from the decision of the highest court in the land, in that circumstance, before the Supreme Court, then there was no basis for conducting any election into those offices.
Okay. Now, it was the INEC, the Electoral Commission, no less, that declared that in Osun State, all 30 seats had been won by the PDP. Now there has been a call, as you've mentioned, principally by Felix Morka, APC National Publicity Secretary, towards the government, to the federal authorities, not to release their allocations. Now, can that be done? Because aren't these constitutional provisions? And I would have expected that the Governor Adeleke, would have been very keen on observing constitutional provisions. So can the federal government indeed accede to the request of Felix Morka or the advice of Felix Morka without going further into legal wranglings?
Okay, thank you for that question. First, allocation to local government or any arm of the government for that matter, and I don't want to go needlessly legalist here, is a constitutional matter. So, and quite correctly, the Supreme Court in the popular, what do we call it again now, in the popular local government autonomy decision made last year, made it quite clear that the local governments were entitled to their own independent and separate allocation, from the federation account. So the question then is, if the federal government has been mandated from that judgment, and literally so, not to release funds to states where the local government positions have not been filled in a manner of speech, with elected, officials, then it follows consequently that in the current circumstance, if the people at the local government are not people duly elected by the people, then the federal government will be entitled to withhold allocation. But this is generally speaking. Now, specifically speaking about Osun State, I'm aware, to the best of my knowledge, that those chairmen who have now since been reinstated by the order of the Court of Appeal and who have since assumed their office, if truly they have fully assumed their office, then I think it will not be necessary for federal government to withhold their local government allocation. However, it will be important for the federal government, and this is also a question of law, as decided by the Supreme Court, to ensure that the allocation are released only to the rightful recipients, that is, those who have been duly elected according to law, those reinstated by the Court of Appeal. So for me, the call of Mr. Felix Moka, would depend on the circumstances in Osun State. If that circumstance is that those in charge of the local government as I speak now are the people duly elected, from October 2022, then the federal government should not exit to release the fund directly to them. But if the state is still purporting to be in control of whatever, they did an election or what they call an election, and if they purport to still want to have the fund released to those illegally elected, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, the product of that sham of an election is illegal, and there is no constitutional basis for federal government to release, public fund to illegally elected local government chairmen. So it will depend, as I said, on circumstances. And I think in this circumstance, as I understand it, the federal government should just simply ensure that the funds are released to the rightful recipient, as I said earlier.
Okay, you did say that you were at a loss to understand why people were going into needless, legalistic aspects of this. It's needless, just unnecessary controversy, some might say. But I wanted to ask you, what is the part of INEC in all of this? Because the governor in, Osun State might want to conduct an election, but he can't do so on his own. He can't do so by himself. He needs for it to have a veneer of legality for, the body constituted for such, to arrange and conduct the election. So do they not concern themselves with the legality of the clients, I beg your pardon, of the candidates being proposed? And in this case, these would be candidates that had been removed by due process, by law. Does this not, is INEC not bound by that? Is INEC not supposed to know? Can they say, oh, we didn't know, nobody told us? I'm just curious about that aspect.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that question. Well, primarily, the responsibility to conduct election at the local government of any state lies, with the state independent electoral commission. Mm-hmm. In this case, which is OSEC. However, by law and also the Electoral Act, the INEC, the national body, also has some input. For example, the state independent electoral commission will still have to depend on INEC for electoral register, because the state by themselves do not have the power constitutionally and capacity to, I would say, gather electoral register and all of that. So to the extent of releasing electoral register to state electoral bodies, the INEC, contribution is required. And beyond that, there is really little or nothing for INEC to do. Now, in this circumstance, I followed the election over the weekend, and I doubt if anyone can actually claim, when people have made those false claims. But I have not really seen anywhere in all of the clips I've seen so far and the report I've received where the voter register was actually displayed at any, I would say, voting point or polling area. I've not also seen, when I said this election was actually a sham, I meant that, quite literally, because all the basic requirements of a credible election, were quite absent. There was no voter accreditation. There was no collation of results. There was no counting of ballots. Collation as well. There was no release of specific results scored by respective candidates. By law, OSEC or INEC, and these are also international standard, is required to provide tallies of numbers. Who voted, what number was counted, who scored what. Yes. All we saw was the OSEC chairman in Osun State, which, by the way, a card-carrying member of PDP, someone who was literally appointed, from a PDP position to become the chairman of OSEC in Osun State. So we only saw him reading out names of people purportedly elected without attaching any specific figures to them. You know, that was quite, I mean, the height of electoral haste you can imagine in this age. And so all of this put together, you know, tells you, you know, something was quite wrong or everything was wrong with that process. So when people now agitate that government, the federal government in this case, should, you know, step in to ensure due process of law is complied with, for example, by not releasing local government funds to illegal. I think people who have done that, they are actually should be commended. What they are doing is to call on government to stand firm and observe or promote the rule of law in the country.
Okay, all right then. Okay, just to take a moment to also announce before continuing with our conversation, just to take a moment to announce that we'll be covering the inauguration of Governor Lucky Aiyedatiwa and his deputy Olaide Adelami, and you know, it's live. It's coming from the Akure Sports Complex. Just to let you know that that's the event you can see on the screens right now. Coverage by TVC, live coverage by TVC. Okay, that's that announcement. So back into the studio, and we still expect to hear from Mr. Moka. Right now, we are chatting with Mr. Dr. Musbau Alamu Latif, Senior Lecturer, Law School, University of Hull in the UK. And he's just been explaining how his view, when you look at everything, and he's just finished speaking, it's little more than a sham. And so what, beyond the APC National Publicity Secretary crying out and offering his advice, what are the options left to the federal government? Because there's this whole independence of, you know, on the one hand, the, you know, executive, on the other hand, you know, we have the state governor. What are the options left? What are the things the federal government will consider in taking its next move, especially as it relates to funds? Yes.
All right. Thank you. Let me start by saying I'm a federalist. I believe in federalism, and I've always advocated for federalism. I believe in state police. I believe in independent states. I mean, particularly in areas of fiscal responsibility.
I've been connected for 15 minutes, and I'm sitting here and I'm listening to your game. The printer doesn't appear to know that I'm
No. I'm very sorry. Sorry, Mr. Moka. One moment, Dr. Latif. Sorry, apologies, Mr. Moka. Felix Moka, APC National Publicity Secretary. Sorry about that, but just to let them know that I had announced you earlier that you'll be joining us, and I'm happy that you are here. On the program already is Dr. Musbau Latif, who is a lecturer in faraway UK. Okay, Dr. Moha, let me just, take some time out to speak with with Mr. Felix Moka. So you made the announcement advising the federal government not to release any local council allocations to them in, Osun, especially the local government. What are the legal, are there any legal implications? Can the federal government just say that, okay, upon getting advice, this is what we're going to do? Or are there processes before they can arrive? In other words, can the PDP in Osun State demand what they think of as their rights?
Rights are never based on illegality, especially when that illegality is of the kind that constitutes a violation, a violent violation of the Nigerian Constitution. You cannot, demand or claim rights that flow from your egregious disrespect from the orders or judgment of the courts, especially a superior court like the Court of Appeal. Now, let's just to put this in context. And by the way, I think that your previous guest,
he still is with us.
Yes, we're still with us.
Dr. Latif.
I think he was, right on the mark in his commentary. Now, let's remind our viewers that this controversy began in 2022 when a federal high court, I believe in Osogbo, entered a judgment that nullified the election of these officials at that time. Now, Nigerians must, I think, take note that between 2022 and just the 10th of February, 2025, just shy of 3 years, that these officials who were sacked by the Federal High Court didn't take to the streets. They didn't stage any form of physical or violent, contestation. They very humbly accepted and honored the judgment of the Federal High Court. Question: why is Governor Adeleke, who raised his right hand and swore on oath to uphold the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, that Constitution which also recognizes and guarantees and proclaims the authority of the courts to resolve disputes between citizens or between citizens and the state? And the Court of Appeal is a court of record, a superior court of record, superior to the Federal High Court, that undertook judicial review of the case before the Federal High Court that led to that decision, and actually decided that that case was incompetent. Now, once that judgment was handed on the 10th of February, everything that was placed on that judgment, including the decision of the Federal High Court to sack these local government officials, all completely fell apart, was vacated by the Court of Appeal. Now, let me remind us that Governor Adeleke in 2022, just shortly after his inauguration, issued an executive order based on the Federal High Court judgment, sacking these officials. Now, why is it so difficult for the same governor to respect a valid subsisting decision of the Court of Appeal that nullified the decision of the Federal High Court on the basis of which he sacked these officials? Now, as your previous guests, my dear brother rightly said, I agree with him, and that is that as far as the law is concerned, as far as the Constitution is concerned, today in Osun State, those officials who were wrongly sacked according to the Court of Appeal, who have been reinstated by the judgment of the Court of Appeal, are the legal, constitutionally declared and judicially certified officials of the local government. That is beyond any question or review. Now, there's a democratic constitutional facility available to Governor Adeleke, which is to appeal to the Supreme Court. Maybe he doesn't know that we have a Supreme Court in this country. He can avail, his government can avail themselves of that opportunity to take this matter to the Supreme Court. That's what our party did for 3 years, patiently litigated until the judgment came. Nobody, I'm sure Nigerians didn't know there was a problem with the local government in Osun State, because we quietly, very humbly respected an adverse decision of the Federal High Court in this matter. So Governor Adeleke's, sham election of Saturday, it was his own parade. It was his own, I think, clearly he has nothing better to do than to, spend public money, taxpayers' money, to conduct an irregular.
Doubt and fear doesn't occur at the canvas, it shows in the canvas. It shows the conation of raw earthen material slabbed, stroked and molded at a pace provided by the doubt and fear.
Have the power to override the decision of the Court of Appeal. Only the Supreme Court in this circumstance may do so. Right. And that has not been done. So as far as we are concerned in the All Progressive Congress, we have local government chairmen and councillors elected back in 2022, whose tenure expires in October 2025. And between now and then, they are the only legally elected, democratically elected judicially certified officials of the Osun State local government system. And which is why I have said in my statement that the federal government must consider, in keeping with the rule of law, in keeping with our constitutional norms, especially in the light of the Supreme Court decision on local government autonomy, to ensure that these phonies, these illegals who were brought, by Adeleke into the system through the back door must not, I think, be entertained with, something as important as our federal communication to local governments in Osun State.
All right, then. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Felix Moha. Now, coming back to you as the lawyer, what? Yes, you were talking. You've heard Mr. Moka say that he agrees with your presentation, and he has also made a similar presentation that we just need to do what is right. So let me come to you. What in the law, since you're familiar with Nigerian law as well, so what are the options that are left if it seems that a veneer of legality has been given the situation in Osun now by the State Independent Electoral Commission actually carrying out the exercise as if there were no legal constraints? And that's why Mr. Moka was calling it a sham. It has to be a sham.
All right, thank you so much for that question. I was trying to make a point earlier, and that is to the effect that I'm a federalist. I believe so much in federalism, but you will not see example of a federal state anywhere in the world, not in India, not in America, not in Canada, not in Australia, and some other places where each unit of a federating system, exists, independently in their own compartment without some level of interactions, and particularly without some level of supervisory, role by the federal government. So in this case, the federal government of Nigeria has a lot of responsibility. One, to enforce the Constitution of Nigeria and ensure due compliance with it. This is one of the reasons why our 1999 Constitution has devoted, the police power of the state, to the federal government. And of course, to deploy the instrumentality of the law according to due process of law and ensure due compliance with law. So for me, the option here to the federal government, I think, is quite clear. First, they can decide to withhold the allocation if the government of Osun State insists to continue, the path of legality, they seem to be forcing on the state. However, if they decide to toe the path of honor by allowing those chairmen who have duly resumed their duty to continue to administer their local government affairs, peacefully, federal government can, of course, also ensure that they release the fund only to the legally certified and judicially certified, as Mr. Muka rightly said, chairman of local government. And of course, I understand that federal government also has the power, this is without a doubt, to deploy, the instrumentality of the law, including the police, to ensure, of course, protection of life and property. So that what happened in Osun State last week, the fatality that we saw, will not recur again. So if the government of Osun State, refuses to ensure due compliance with law and order in their state, or any state for that matter, the federal government of Nigeria has a superior responsibility to step in, where those who primarily hold that responsibility within their territory are failed. So for me, really, I think going forward, and I'm happy that the Osun State government just yesterday did actually advise their illegally elected chairman to stay back at home. If this is a genuine, step towards peace or reconciliation, then that is highly commendable. But if it is another attempt to foist a fait accompli or to render the local government system in Osun State, I would say, redundant or comatose, then I fear that the federal government may still have to step in again to ensure that law and order are maintained. So for me, really, I think it is up to Osun State government to decide exactly what they want.
Okay. Mr. Moore, I'm going to come to you, but let me bring in our caller from home, George in Ikeja. Good morning, Mr. George.
Good morning, Uncle Yori.
Thank you for calling in.
And good morning to the guests.
Yes.
Uncle Yori, when the new CGN, the lady, when she was sworn in a few months ago, she said something that she was going to sanitize our judicial system and make sure this way of the courts giving contradictory court orders that are against the law of the land will be avoided. I stand to be corrected. I have not seen that happening yet. In Osun State, the Court of Appeal ruled that local government chairmen and councillors that were removed by the governor should go back to their seats. They went back and took over the secretariat. It brought about some violence. I remember 6 people were said to have died. 23 others are still in hospitals. Then that process was still on. The governor went ahead to propose a date to conduct local government elections when he knew very well that the ones that were there have been reinstated. The Attorney General of the Federation, seeing the danger ahead, issued a statement and advised the governor not to go ahead with that elections based on legalities that are on ground to avoid further calamities. This governor still went ahead claiming that the chief judge of his own state gave another contradictory court order that that election should be held. I think the CGN should please be reminded of the pledge and promise she made when she assumed office that this kind of things will not happen again. We should be able to act as a country of civilized judicial system. Why should things like this happen and nothing happens to such judges? Indeed. I saw some of the video clips of the election, so-called election. The governor was not holding any voter card. I mean, he did not. There was nothing to verify that this person is a registered voter. They just went to some places, collect a ballot paper, and go and vote. If you will, the clips you were showing, please take your time to watch it again. So people just went to a polling station and they were giving paper to vote, nothing to show that this person is a registered voter or he is accredited. Nothing like that. He was just doing it in order to circumvent the system. We should not allow things like this to be happening in our country. I'm concerned.
Okay, Mr.
Good
George.
morning.
Thank you very much for calling in. Mr. Felix Morga, I imagine...
If I may, or if you permit me, I think George made a statement I think I would like to correct for the benefit of the public, if you permit me.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you. I agree with George entirely. He has made the point, validly well. However, the judgment that was given purportedly last week Friday was not made by Osun State Chief Judge. It was made by another. That's what Judge said, which is quite incorrect. So it was made by another judge in Osun State who sits in Ilesha. And I tell you, that is another scandalous aspect of the whole mix. But we may not want to go into detail of that for now. Okay. I just thought I should correct that. It wasn't the CJ. It was a judge of the High Court of Osun State, though.
It wasn't the chief judge. Okay. Now, Mr. Moka, what is the next step? I mean, it seems clear. That is why, Dr. Lateef said that it's an unnecessary legal controversy that is being fostered on all of us here. So what's the next step towards righting what you see as this wrong? I mean, in terms of, does the party need to now, the party does it now need to go to court? Or you have advised the government on how to go to frustrate, the intention. But do you need further force of the law? Yes, Mr. Moka.
Governor Adeleke, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you now. I just started hearing you.
Governor Adeleke, like I said in the beginning, knows what he's doing. He's simply rabble-rousing. And I think that his directive to these officials who were purportedly elected last Saturday, illegally, as I said, unconstitutionally, as I said, out of that sham election, his directive to them to stay at home and not go to the secretariat is a wonderful first step to rectifying his departure from the path of constitutionality. And my strong advice to Governor Adeleke is that he shouldn't take that dishonorable path down a road that leads nowhere. He should simply be the statesman that he ought to be as governor, to do the right thing, which is, even if he disagrees with the Court of Appeal, go to the Supreme Court and litigate this matter to a logical conclusion. The Supreme Court is still the highest court of our land. And hopefully their decision, everyone, listens to the Supreme Court. So, he should do that rather than try to, as your caller said, circumvent, the constitutional process to subvert, judicial authority. He can't do that. He's governor, but the judicial branch under our constitution, is also, imbued with powers. All of the judicial authority of our country is vested in the courts. They have spoken. Only a superior court to the Court of Appeal can reverse the decision of the Court of Appeal. That's what they should do. So status quo must be maintained, which is that those reinstated officials must be allowed to continue. And by the way, their tenure expires in October. After October, then you will be, entitled to conduct, fresh elections. And then hopefully it will be, transparent, free and fair. And hopefully at the end of the day, everyone can live with the outcome of that election. But until then, Governor Adeleke must do what he has started now. He must finish it, which is to keep those sham, officials out of the local government secretariats for the sake of peace.
Okay.
Because right now, he is holding the key to the peace in Osun State. And my advice to him is to, use that key, wisely and effectively to maintain the peace and law and order in his state.
Okay. Now still on this point, if I could just chip in, what do you make of what you've called the whole election? Both you gentlemen have referred to the election as purported. We know what that means. So the question now is, all 30 seats were won by the PDP. Just your commentary on that.
There was no election that was won. You have to have an election first.
Yes.
That is valid for you to talk about winning. There was no election in Osun State. There was an activity which I've called a sham, some shambolic activity, which was neither won nor lost. There was no, in the eyes of the law, there was no election in Osun State because the Court of Appeal's decision ensures that no valid election could have been held last Saturday or any other time, unless and until that decision of the Court of Appeal is, disrupted or vacated by a superior court. It hasn't happened. So, let's not talk about 30 people winning an election. There was no election that was legally, and therefore we can speak of those who won and those who lost.
Indeed. Dr. Lateef, so here we are. It's clear. The way you gentlemen have explained it, and anybody who is interested, what is there not to understand about a court has made a decision that has rendered all of what happened over the weekend? It was supposed to be impossible. You can't. There was no vacancy because the people were there. Yet they went ahead and did what they did. my concern, the question I should put to you as a lawyer is that I am positive, not just sure, I'm positive that they have numerous lawyers in Ekiti. I mean, I beg your pardon. They have numerous lawyers over there in Ondo. So all of this, it's known. It's known.
Well, okay. Is it me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, as with every other professions, yeah, they are lawyers, and I really want to be very modest here, but I'm going to rely on a document to say this. Now, the judgment of Court of Appeal that was decided on the 10th of February actually came down very hard on some lawyer that court judgment, 53 pages, described as doing unethical practices. One of the justices actually wondered whether the rules of professional conduct, should apply to, discipline some of these lawyers. So yes, we do have some colleagues, unfortunately, who have literally abandoned their responsibility. And this is why we have this contrived legal controversy, as I've put it. Ordinarily, everything is plain. Yes, sometimes you put 5 lawyers together, they have 5 opinions and all of that. But then there are also things that we call elementary law, things that are basic, that should not ordinarily accommodate controversies or debate. And what we have seen in Osun State is one of such. With that judgment of the Court of Appeal, ordinarily, there ought not to be this needless legal controversy. But because some people have chosen to be unscrupulous, as the Court of Appeal has described them, and really came hard on them, so we can only hope that as we all strive to build a better society, professionals across board, including lawyers, will be up and doing and up to task to their responsibility, to first and foremost uphold the law, the Constitution, and elevate that above whatever political or partisan interests they may have. It's quite unfortunate.
Indeed. Okay. Just before I come to you, Mr. Moka, Ade in the UK has called in. Good morning, Ade.
Good morning, Yori. My own view about this issue is this. I think where we have problem in Nigeria is the judiciary, because it seems our judiciary, they are very, very slow in taking actions. Maybe the Attorney General should work on this, or I don't know what they do. Maybe have a meeting with the Chief Judge. If you remember, Governor Adeleke worked with 9 members or 8 members for 4 years. No, nothing was done. Remember, River State is now working with 2 people, just 2 people, as a speaker, and no judiciary, nothing. It's too slow. So now look at the Osun one again. I expected the Attorney General to go to Supreme Court, and in order to avoid anarchy. These are urgent matters. They should take care of it quickly, but nothing is happening. You don't be surprised. Adeleke will finish his term. Nothing will happen. Mark my word. Nothing will happen. And those people that are sitting at home will be earning salary. So our problem is judiciary, nothing more than that. God bless Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much, Ade, for calling in. Maybe, Mr. Moka, maybe you could weigh in on that conjecture, because the way that viewer has seen it, he's a Nigerian, we've seen these things. He cited 2 examples of untoward, arrangements going on in 2 states. So, Mr. Moka, you said that perhaps you can find reason to commend Governor Adeleke in at least advising those who purportedly won at that, election that you have described the way you have described it, to stay away, to stay at home. So that will help keep the peace. But this other speculation that if we're not careful, this could go on for the entirety of Adeleke's term.
Now, I imagine, first of all, I think that the caller has made his point, and is a point that we all who are lawyers and who are interested in improving the system of justice delivery in our country and the question of access to justice I have over the years discussed and made strong, recommendations for how our judicial system can be made more, efficient.
Okay.
Especially efficient in both in quality, efficient also in time. So that's work in progress. This government, I think, is beginning to do quite a bit to, change that whole experience. However, having said that, our courts are our courts. We have to work with what we have as of today. Hopefully, it gets better tomorrow. The truth of the matter is that in the Osun case, it's actually a very clear, matter that we're discussing. People were elected in 2022 for, a period of time. Unfortunately, they were not allowed to, enjoy their tenure as constitutionally, granted because of the sack that came down in 2022. The reason nobody is screaming, it was that, sadly, it was instrumented by, a court judgment. And, we in APC, we have respect for judicial authority. So people, quietly complied, not because they were happy. They complied with that decision. Mm-hmm. And which is why today, we at the All Progressives Congress are, really, a difficulty understanding why an elected governor who himself has been a beneficiary of judicial decisions would choose, obdurately, stubbornly, to ignore the decision of a court of appeal. That is a terrible precedent that he's setting in that state. Because, who knows tomorrow? Yeah. I mean, what if things happen tomorrow that, requires court decisions? Will this same governor rush back to the court like he did in the past to try to contest anything? Who will take him seriously? So I think that we all have a collective interest to ensure that we recognize and uphold the authority of the courts, because ultimately they are the arbiter of disputes between citizens and between citizens and the state. So I am confident that, this matter, the courts will prevail, because right now it's not APC versus PDP or APC versus Governor Adeleke. It is actually Governor Adeleke versus the courts. And the courts always prevail.
Indeed.
And in this instance,
we're going to have to prevail. We're going to have to leave it there. Mr. Felix Morka, APC National Publicity Secretary, I thank you very much for coming on the program. I know you have a very tight schedule, but thank you very much for coming to throw some light on that. Dr. Lateef, just before we go, any last word on this subject matter?
All right, thank you. The governor of Osun State is the chief security officer of the state. I will urge him to toe the path of constitutionality and follow the due process of law. And I also urge the federal government not to just stand by and allow brazen violation of the Constitution of Nigeria. So where and when it is necessary, the federal government should never hesitate to step in and enforce the Constitution of Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Misbah Alamu Lateef. Really appreciate you both, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And that's where we're going to have to leave it today. Do please join us tomorrow for a fresh edition. I am Yori Folari. Bye-bye for now.